I'm Eddie Muller. Welcome back to Noir Alley, where Hollywood's biggest and brightest stars are at their darkest and most dangerous. Today's film being a prime example. It's the only movie to feature the two stars most emblematic of Hollywood's noir era, Humphrey Bogart and Barbara Stanwyck. The Two Mrs. Carrolls, released by Warner Brothers in 1947, is, however, a far cry from the Maltese Falcon or Double Indemnity. Bogart is cast against type as an artist living in a quaint English village, and Stanwyck plays a gullible woman not at all like the tough cookies who were her on-screen specialty. The film has become a footnote in their filmographies, which is largely due to its troubled production history. So, hang in there. This requires some explaining. In the summer of 1943, Bogart made a picture for Warner Brothers called Conflict, about a man who plots to murder his wife after he falls for her younger sister, played by the studio's new ingenue, Alexis Smith. But they canceled the release of Conflict after a lawsuit was brought alleging the script had been plagiarized. While the case dragged on through 1944, Warner's hired producer Mark Hellinger to create something to replace Conflict. Given that Bogart, thanks to Casablanca, To Have and Have Not, and his romance with Lauren Bacall, was now the studio's top male star. Well, surprise, the new film would be about a man who wants to kill his wife after he falls for a younger woman, played by Alexis Smith. The Two Mrs. Carrolls is based on a 1935 stage play of the same name by Martin Vail, the pseudonym of Marguerite Wheeler, wife of writer Bayard Wheeler and stepmother of screenwriter Anthony Wheeler. Yet another example of a woman adopting a man's name to make her writing more saleable. Warner's bought the rights to the play in 1944 for $225,000, with the intention of it being a starring vehicle for Bette Davis. When that didn't work out, there was talk of doing it with Ida Lupino and Zachary Scott. Once Conflict went into the deep freeze, Bogart became the male lead. Stanwyck came aboard once Hellinger picked Peter Godfrey to direct. He'd directed Stanwyck's previous film, Christmas in Connecticut, and Godfrey and Stanwyck had become close friends. Given that the story is set in England, at least one person involved in the production had to be British, and that was Peter Godfrey. He'd been a stage actor in the 1920s, but after coming to Hollywood, he moved behind the camera, directing a few B pictures for RKO and Warner's before stepping up to the A-list in 1945. He celebrated by giving himself a bit part in this film as a racetrack tout bantering with Bogart.
I know what I'm a-talking about, so what about it, gents? What about it?
The Two Mrs. Carrolls went before the cameras in April 1945. But there was a production hiatus the following month as newlyweds Bogart and Bacall left for a brief honeymoon. The lawsuit surrounding Conflict had by then been settled, and that film was released in June, meaning Warner Brothers now had two films in which Bogart played a sinister wife killer. Not exactly what the public wanted, given its fascination with Bogart and Bacall's real-life romance. As a result, Warner's decided to shelve The Two Mrs. Carrolls as it scrambled to prepare more films tailored for Bogart and Bacall. Remember, an unreleased film is an asset on a studio's ledgers. It becomes a liability only when it's released. By the time Warner Brothers finally released The Two Mrs. Carrolls in the winter of 1947, The Big Sleep had been completed and released to great success. Bogart had made Dead Reckoning on loan to Columbia, and Dark Passage, his third film with Bacall, was in production. To say that The Two Mrs. Carrolls was released is a bit of a misnomer. More accurately, it escaped. Also featuring Nigel Bruce, Isabel Elsom, Patrick O'Moore, and 9-year-old Ann Carter. Here is The Two Mrs. Carrolls.